Take you to Newzroom Africa's business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, who is in the city of Cape Town for us this afternoon. Xolani Mbanjwa, we saw the man of the moment, the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, donning his standard hat and looking all cheerful. What is it that you are seeing from your vantage point at this hour, at least, as we expect to begin in about 15 minutes?
Good afternoon, yes indeed, the Minister of Finance has just arrived with his entourage. We hope that he has good news for South Africa. It's a difficult balancing act for him. It's something that the country is waiting to see as to how these programs are going to be funded. We want to find out about the basic income grant, the social relief of distress grant. We want to find out if there's going to be a reconfiguration of the government, merging of some ministries with others and doing away with unfunded projects just to save money. And one of the most important things, of course, is the public sector wage bill. It's a huge matter as far as the minister is, as far as government finances rather are concerned. But I'm joined now by Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who is an economist with the Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you very much for your time, Doctor. What is your expectation here today? You've heard all of the speculation about the austerity measures, that they have not worked and there might be budget cuts. What's the big thing for you as a person watching from the outside and an economist with an interest in public finances?
Thank you so much for having me, and a very good afternoon. I think the first thing the country wants to know is what is the state of our public fiscus? Are we able to meet the revenue that we have actually projected? It does look like, as you have said, the likelihood of us meeting our targets is a little bit off the mark. So what it says is that Treasury's financial projections and some of their assumptions are things that we actually will understand when he gives us the medium-term budget policy statement in terms of how far we are from the range, particularly on revenue. The expenditure part, we do know, and we do expect some allocations that will be reduced, and we will hear and listen very carefully in terms of exactly on the social housing side, on the social development, on the education, and also some of the cash transfers that you've mentioned. What is the likelihood of those actually remaining on our expenditure? One of the big tickers that will push up our costs in terms of expenditure that was not budgeted is the increase in the wage bill in terms of aligning it to CPI. So we know that the negotiations have reached a settlement. This was not budgeted for, and it's not reflecting on the fiscus's balance sheet. So it's going to be a very careful balancing act that the Minister of Finance has to give today. I think South Africans are not optimistic. That's the reality. Everyone knows that we've collected less than expected. Everyone also knows that growth is not as high as expected, so everything will be revised downwards. That is the expectation. The question, though, is what likely is going to be done to rejig, to reconfigure, and to revive the economic stagnation and move from the stagnation that we're in. And I think that I'm listening carefully beyond the accounting in terms of whether or not we will have a budget deficit that is wider than expected. But what are we going to do about growth forecasts? What are we going to do about trying to push the needle in terms of the reforms that are necessary? How are we going to revive household expenditure, consumption, because that is where things are really compressed and depressed because of the conditions, the environment of the economic environment we're in. So I think there's a lot of things we want to hear in terms of not just the consolidation, but really are the assumptions going to be on the mark in terms of projections? How far are we from the needle is what we want to know. But also, is there anything that will relieve us in the 3-year outlook in terms of the MTEF framework? And I think that the minister has to be less optimistic, more conservative. And I think South Africans want to know also, as the investment expectations, the markets are watching what's going on. Investors are interested to see how far we are in terms of our realizing our expectations. And so it's not just the households that are looking, the markets business confidence will look at what is going on in terms of outcomes. And I think it's important for South Africa to not just have wide variance, but to put in place measures that are really on the mark in terms of what shall be done about the current stagnation that we are facing.
Briefly, Dr. Moleko, on the issue of debt spiraling out of control, some are saying that it is not out of kilter with developing nations just like South Africa. The debt to GDP ratio is on the same level as other countries. Is that enough to give us comfort about the rising debt levels for the public purse?
So the issue about debt is the ability to service your interest. So right now South Africa has a 366 billion interest on debt, and we are servicing that, or rather a vote. We are actually allocating 112 billion to South African police service, so people just understand. 259 billion to health. Combine that, it's less than what we're paying for debt. So what I'm saying is the servicing of debt, the interest we are paying, a lot of the debt is foreign denominated debt. So we, as the currency depreciates to the extent that it is now, we are paying a very high cost for our debt. So the first question you've got to ask, can we service that debt? The minister has publicly said that we are constrained. A lot of the yields, the bonds, are going to need to be financed in the short to the medium term. We have to service that debt. I think the critical question is emerging economies, first world economies, US, India, others have up to 200% debt to GDP. That is not the question South Africa needs to answer. The question is our growth projections are worsening. That is on the back, and the reason why our debt to GDP ratio is worsening. And so because we're not growing, we're not able to collect the revenue, we're not able to collect the corporate income tax that we actually have projected, mining exports and the buoyancy that we had from commodity price increasing is not where it was a year, 2 years ago. So all those tax windfalls that we experienced that enabled us to ride the wave these last 2 years, unfortunately we don't have that buffer any longer. And so for the debt to GDP question to improve, we have to improve our GDP. We have to improve our revenue collection. We also have to improve our growth in terms of economic activity so that they collect more from VAT, from corporate income tax, and also our personal income tax. So you know that all of these go into our coffers as the fixed fiscus. So if those don't increase, the debt to GDP ratio will worsen because that's the denominator. We continue then to service the debt from our fiscus, taking in more allocations to service debt instead of service delivery. That is a problem. So I think that South Africans may not be necessarily focusing only on the right question when you look at debt to GDP. Debt to GDP ratios, as long as you can service them. South Africa's sovereign debt outlook in terms of our ability to service debt is there. But we're taking more than a fifth of our fiscus to pay debt. And debt for servicing expenditure, that's a problem.
There is a big problem indeed. Dr. Moleko, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, the economist with the Stellenbosch Business School. And we know South Africa is borrowing 2 billion rands or more than 2 billion rands a day to run its projects and spends 18 cents in interest payments for every rand in revenue that we make. And that is an untenable situation. Back to you in Studio Tutu.
Xolani Mbanjwa is Newzroom Africa's business editor. Thank you very much for that contribution, Xolani Mbanjwa.